Here's my baby.
I'm Dana Denha.
And I'm Melissa Bondi, and this is Adventures in Parenthood, where we take a ride on the roller coaster that we call parenting.
When our little bundles of joy blow into our lives like a tornado, you can't imagine what parenting will be like. And you really must adopt that one day at a time attitude. But every parent can agree that we all dread that time when our kids turn to teens and are ready to take the wheel. Melissa and I are nowhere near that stage. And I'm not looking forward to it, as I said, but we can share our own experiences on the road. You know, when I was a teen, I was awful. Like when I can remember, I was literally talking to my husband about this. I remember I would do stuff that wasn't quite legal. Like I do like a maneuver that was a little suspect with my permit. And then my dad would be like, Dana. And I'd be like, Dad, whatever. Like that sort of like attitude.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, what was wrong with me? You know? Can you think of instances like that where you were just like that sort of like, I am above the law. I'm invincible. Nothing's going to happen to me.
I think when it came maybe to speeding, I didn't think too much of that. I was a pretty good teen driver, in my opinion. I had my own car very early. I was very fortunate. So I took pride in that. So if anything was going to happen to it, I was going to be devastated. So I think there's something to be said for that. But I definitely know I was a speeder, but I was a speeder under the radar, meaning I never really got caught, but I knew I was speeding as a teen and didn't really care.
Oh,
you don't really care.
I remember I barely even had my license and I got a ticket for blowing a stop sign because I was with my friends and they were all, I swear to God, Melissa, this is so annoying. And this is what I'd never want to happen to my own kid. All of my friends were being so mean to me by just being really disrespectful to the police officer while I was being pulled over, that he like took it out on me then and I had a ticket. I had to go to court and fight it. And then it was like, I had to be, have a permit for longer. I had to be like under the guidance of my parents for longer then based on like going to court and stuff. So I think those are all actually good things because I think, I did run a stop sign. That really happened. And I had just gotten my license. So right. I do think you do things as a teen that I would never do those things now. And like, if I did do it, I would feel guilty about doing it. Not like, whatever.
Right. And,
Yeah,
it takes, right. You learn from, and now you know what you want to let our little drivers once it's time know. And I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah. Taking it away.
Joining us is Senior Officer with the Ann Arbor PD, Doug Martell, to drop some knowledge on teens and driving. Welcome back to the show, Doug. Everyone has their own experience with being a teen, having teen drivers, whatever it might be. I mean, yours is probably a little more extensive than most because you're a police officer, so you probably deal with a little more teens and driving than the average Joe. So tell us a little bit about what you know about it and what you've sort of experienced.
Well, I probably know just about enough to be dangerous. So I'll get into my, the professional part of it. I've been a police officer for collectively for about 32 years now. And so I've run across a number of teen drivers in various situations, some of them good, some of them not very favorable for them. Anytime they have any police contact when they're driving is to take away some type of learning experience. My wife and I have 4 boys, 3 of whom are through driver's ed, and one is working his way toward that every year. He'll be 12 next year. So it's as a parent, I think it's a big rite of passage for kids to get their driver's licenses, and anybody that's out there that has watched their son or daughter drive away from the curb for the first time with their full license. There's this, there's a little angst that goes along with that, and just hope that you prepared them for that step the best that you can as parents.
I can't imagine back in like the even the early to mid 90s when you were getting your permit, and it was really just you got a permit and then you got your license. It was like not this graduated licensing system. But I was one of the first people that was part of the graduated license system where I had to have my permit for 6 months. I had to do all this stuff.
Sure.
Can you talk about that and how it changed and why it changed for the better? Because at the time, I think I was not thinking it was very cool because I was a teen, but now as like a 38-year-old woman, I'm very glad that these laws are in place.
Yes, and those are in place for a number of reasons, but I think the kind of the tip of the spear on that was folks started to recognize that young drivers were involved in a disproportionate amount of traffic crashes, and that there needed to be more practice, there needed to be more supervision and oversight as they learn to drive. And so they built in these levels of graduated license to help kind of monitor that from some of it from a state standpoint, but a lot of it falls on the parents and the guardians at home who are responsible for making sure that these young drivers are getting the amount of hours they need. So I've had people ask me, when do you think driver's ed begins? And I halfway jokingly say, the minute that you take that rear facing car seat, turn your child around facing front, that's when driver's ed starts. Because they're gonna pick up on all the things that you do and say in the car, any frustrations that may come out, those kinds of things they're gonna pick up on. And some people have said, well, I imagine them, they might even be picking up on some of that when they're rear facing car seats. So basically starts out with driver's ed. When you're 14 years and 8 months old.
But a lot of those kids are ready to start driver's training that minute that 8 months hits.
Oh, the clock is ticking. And as soon as the alarm goes off, they're like, okay, let's go. And my wife and I had our kids pay for their driver's ed. It was like $450. And that was just part of our thought process is that it's really a privilege to drive. It's not a right. The first segment basically is driver's education, and you just seek out a driver's ed school.
The schools do not provide this at all anymore, right? This is not anything.
Right, that's what I heard.
No, back in the 70s, it was through Ypsilanti High School, and we there was several weeks in the summer that we just went, and they had driver's ed instructors that were typically teachers at the school, and they just did this in the summertime, and we learned to drive.
Much more complicated now. And from my understanding, schools have not done it for probably almost 2 decades now.
I would say that's probably pretty accurate. With the advent of all the private companies that have come up to teach kids to drive, and they all have to be state certified. So all their instructors are state certified.
Did you see, or, have you seen stats once they started that graduated driver's license? Did the teen crash number go down? Do we know? Did it have a positive impact?
That age group, 16 and 17, still account for
the majority,
all the crashes. And when you look at like 15 to 20-year-olds, more than any other age group.
Then the other percentage, I would assume, would be drunk driving and maybe elderly drivers.
Inexperience is the big thing.
Right.
And there are a high amount of crashes in those graduated level license.
Dana and I didn't have 25 years ago, or I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was distracted driving.
Right.
And if it was distracted, it was the radio or your friends in the back
your
seat.
Friends. I feel like that was the big one when I was a teen. It was your friends
Your
that
friends
were
in the car, pack them in.
And that's part of the graduated driver's license. You can't drive with your friends at the beginning of it.
In the car.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Doug, why don't you go through the steps of this graduated driver's license so parents understand? I understand it somewhat decently because I lived through it.
Right. And it's, it can be a little bit tough to navigate, especially if you're not familiar with it. And I still have to look things up because they have made a few changes to them. But basically it starts with driver's ed. And once they finish their driver's ed, they get a certificate from their driver's ed instructor. And then they can take that to the Secretary of State and get their, what they call the Level 1 learner's license. And then that allows them to drive with a parent legal guardian or someone that one of those people appoint that's a licensed driver that's over 21.
So it could be your aunt or uncle or someone like
Right.
that. As long as your
Or, you know,
parents are cool with it.
or older,
Yep.
yeah, or like an older brother or sister, as
Yeah.
long as they're 21 or over. And then some of the restrictions are that they are not allowed to text while they drive, which is across the board for everybody. Is not supposed to text while they drive. If they have like the hands-free calling in the car,
That's fine.
legally that's allowed. And in my world, there's kind of a differentiation between where the law is and what is safe. And I always lean more toward what is safe. For us, probably doesn't seem very complex, but for a person that's just starting, it's a very complex skill.
Do you pull people over, specifically teens or young adults, for texting? And do you see that? And do you pull them over? Is there a ticket to be written, or is there warnings, or is that? I feel like that's somewhat of a myth.
While the car's moving, no texting. If you stop at a stoplight and you feel that you need to answer a text or whatever, then that's permissible. Until the person behind you is blowing their horn because the light's green and you sat there for 15 seconds. But to be quite honest, it's hard to prove.
Yeah.
So I policed a crash where somebody went through a traffic light, a red light, and caused a crash, and they admitted to me they were texting.
The texting and driving has nothing to do with age. I'll tell you what, I'll be driving down a street in Ann Arbor, merging onto an expressway, and someone next to me is on their phone. They're merging onto the expressway. They're not looking at anything. I have so much anxiety because I'm afraid they're going to hit me because they're not obviously paying attention and they're doing too many things. Their hands are in too many things. So as a grown woman, as a teenager, it's like, just don't do it. Just don't do it. Don't even do it at a stoplight. Just wait till you get your destination.
Yeah, it's not worth it. And if you feel compelled, because you feel like you have to answer this, whatever it is, your phone's blowing up, pull off into a parking lot, take the time to answer it, and then and tell the person, hey, I can't do that. Or set your phone so the person that texts you, there's alerts that your phone will send them automatically that says, I'm driving right now, I'll get back to you when I'm done driving.
With the CarPlay, it's called CarPlay. I don't know if you have it, but I've got it. I feel like that's a double-edged sword. So you've got CarPlay to be hands-free and to have all this technology, and yet we're not supposed to be really using all that technology in the vehicle, like unless you're pulled over or stopped. But I remember when I first got it on one of my newer cars, and I thought, CarPlay, like what's the irony there? Like we shouldn't be.
Yeah. It's like counterintuitive.
Exactly.
Do this, but don't do this.
Yeah. So it's enticing though to make you do stuff in your car. Unfortunately, I think it's something that these would need to be instilled in these kids that are learning to drive now, because we didn't have CarPlay, years ago. We didn't have anything like that.
No, nothing close.
No.
I agree. It's kind of counterintuitive. Right.
We're talking about teens and driving, and it is a really big deal to have a teen driver. Your insurance goes up. Accident rates go up. I mean, I talked to my sister when her 3 kids were all teens. I don't even know how she paid for the car insurance. It's so astronomical. So a way to combat that is by being a safer driver and going through the proper steps and really being honest about all the steps when you're doing driver's training. So Doug, why don't you pick up where we left off?
Seatbelts are paramount in cars. Whether there's a law for them, I mean, there is a law that you need to wear them, but that should just be an automatic. Seatbelts are worn in the car, and that's one of the restrictions. At level 1 is seatbelts are required for everyone in the front seat. And here's the thing about this is it says if you're 15 or younger, if you're under 16, you have to wear a seatbelt in the rear seat. But if you're 16 or over, there's no law that requires you to wear a seatbelt in the back seat. But I've seen crashes where people that were unbelted in the back crash into the seat ahead of them, where there's a belted person, and that person is seriously injured. Both of them are. So it's paramount that, even as, everybody, it doesn't matter where you're sitting in the car, should be wearing a seat and shoulder restraint, period. Just for safety, push the law aside. It's just a good common safety sense or common sense safety issue. is
And
the very
once you
seatbelt
start
thing.
clicking it, you never stop doing it. I mean, once you get into that mentality of putting your seatbelt on,
Yeah.
it's just second nature. Like I do it if I'm in the car for like literally a second, I'll put my seatbelt on and I'm like, oh, I'm not even really going anywhere.
Right, exactly. Once they're in level 1, they have to be there for at least 3 months before they can go to level 2. And then they have a driving log that they have to show. They have to have 50 hours total.
Who's logging that? Who's keeping track of that?
That's parents. That's parents logging that.
The parents have to sign off on the log to say
Yes.
that the kids drove that. And here's the other thing that you have to think about, because you mentioned, daytime driving, nighttime driving, expressway driving.
I was just going to say,
Here's the thing. I remember my mom didn't feel completely comfortable doing things with me when I was trying to get my license, but my dad would step up to the plate and do them because I think sometimes parents feel so weird about, I don't want to get on the expressway with someone that doesn't know how to drive. But if you don't get on the expressway with them, they're getting on the expressway either with a driver's teacher and failing or alone. So you need to be the person to do it.
Right. And the key to this, and as parents know, most of parenting is patience. It takes a lot of patience to teach young people how to drive. And I usually will set it up like, hey, I'm not sitting here to criticize how you're driving. I'm just going to give you some hints on how to do things better and safer. Because most of the things that they're doing, they have little or no experience doing at all. So I've been driving for over 44 years, and I think I like to think I've learned a few things along the way. I try to pass that on to them. So once they've got those 32 hours in, and they've got at least 3 months, then they can move on to segment 2, and that's like a 6 hours of classroom instruction. So that's why it's a little bit cheaper than the first segment as far as the driver's ed. And then they have to go to the Secretary of State and apply for the next step. And I think there's some resources. There's lots of resources on the Secretary of State website.
That's where I looked. I went on there and there is a lot of stuff. And it's like, it's really something you should look into while, at that 14 and 8 month mark to know what you're doing, know what you're getting into.
Well,
I'm gonna actually stop you right there, and we will be back in exactly 60 seconds with more from Doug and teen driving. We're back with Doug, and he was just talking about, the graduated driver's license and the different steps and the hours that you have to log. One thing that I've always sort of like now thinking about it when I was a teen and now being an adult, as a driver, when I was young, I definitely felt like I was sort of invincible. And I don't have that feeling as a driver anymore. I have a lot more fear as an adult woman, as a driver, than I did as a teen girl. And I don't understand that, but I think it is, your brain's only developed so far. And I think this is probably, and Doug, you can allude on this, why you see so many teen crashes and so many speeding tickets and stuff like that from teens.
Right. And I agree with that. I think that, as when you're younger, you have that thought like, oh, nothing bad ever's going to happen to me. And then there's that kind of that risk taking age. And like you said, their brains, their impulsive brains are not developed out of that until they're, you're 25 plus some folks. So, you've got that window of time where you've got that risk taking on their own. They have passengers in the car that may be urging them to take some risks. So there's those things. And I was fortunate enough to go to an occupant protection seminar quite a few years ago that was put on by the Office of Highway Safety and Planning through the Michigan State Police. And the instructor, we were talking about airbags and their effectiveness, and he was talking about how the difference is how people would drive if there was a big metal spike on the middle of their steering wheel, how carefully they would drive.
Yeah.
Versus knowing that this car is built with all these safety features. And I thought, wow, that's a little bit kind of medieval and strange, but if you think about it in the terms of how careful you would drive if you knew that if you had, you crashed into something, you'd really get hurt. And then they talked about how much force is put on your body in a crash. And so I pulled up there's a website called Omni Calculator. It's OMI or OMNI calculator. And it tells you put in your weight and how fast the car's going. And it tells you how much force is on your body, whether you're belted or not belted. So just a real quick example. If you're not wearing your seatbelt and you're doing 25 miles an hour and you weigh 150 pounds, you're going to hit the dash with 23,873 pounds of force.
Wow.
Okay, that's
driving like as slow as you're pretty much driving. That's neighborhood driving.
That's 25 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you weigh 150 pounds. So if you're wearing your belt, everything the same, so 25 miles an hour, 150 pound person, your impact force on the dash would be 4,775 pounds.
That's a big difference.
Right. That's huge. And then it's kind of neat because you can play with it miles per hour, weight, and it just gives you an idea. Parents might bring that up and say, can you, to their football playing son who's getting ready to get their license, can you bench press 25,000 pounds? Can you bench press 4,700 pounds? Because that's what it's going to take to keep your hands, keep your body from hitting the dashboard at that without a seatbelt. So, that's like kind of, it was eye-opening. It was always eye-opening to me. And even 3 miles an hour is like 3,000 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. So,
when we're talking about driving, what are some of the, I'd like to know some of the misunderstood laws that people have trouble knowing, and what are some of the harder things? I remember, as getting my license, I remember having a parallel park, and that was tough for me. That was probably the toughest thing for me. And honestly, I still don't like doing it today.
And you're not alone. There's a lot of folks that don't parallel park. There's not a huge need for parallel parking anymore. I teach emergency vehicle operation at the police academy at Washtenaw Community College, and one of our skill builders, they're not tested on it, but one of our skill builders is parallel parking. And I always ask them, when's the last time you parallel parked? In driver's ed.
Yeah.
Is the typical answer. And even they struggle with it. And that's, it's an acquired skill. It takes practice.
I don't remember when I started to drive having roundabouts. They didn't exist.
And I had that in my notes. Roundabouts are popping up all over. There's probably more in Washtenaw County than any other county in the state.
Yeah.
Yield is your shield.
Right.
So, and I think roundabouts are great. It's just building the culture and building the understanding on how they operate. And they certainly reduce. They don't, when they start to pop up, they don't necessarily reduce crashes, but crash severity they do.
Okay.
When they
I think over time they probably do reduce crashes if you're used to them. If you live in an area where there are a lot of them, like I know how to use a roundabout now. I live in an area where there's so many of them. It'd be ridiculous if I didn't know how to use one at this point.
Right. Well, South State and Ellsworth, when that first got between Pittsfield Township and Ann Arbor PD, we were policing crashes almost constantly there. But they were low impact. And then as time went on, fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. And now it's no different than most other, probably no different than most other intersections in the city.
Okay.
For crash.
We're running out of time. Before we go, you are an expert. You have almost 4 boys you've put through driver's training, so you've dealt with this as a father. what are tips that you can give parents going into the driver's training and just having teen drivers and then drivers in their early 20s?
That's a great question. I mentioned this earlier. Be patient with them when you're training them. Be honest on those logs when the state asks you to do those 50 hours of daytime driving and 10 hours of nighttime driving. Be honest with them, because folks, these young people, they need all the practice they can possibly because inexperience is huge. And as they get out on their own and start to drive, know their whereabouts. Ask, hey, where are you going? Call me when you get there. Let me know that you're there, so that I know that you're there safely. And you know what? When you're coming home, let me know when you're leaving, so I know when to expect you. You know, I don't think that's too much to ask. They have these Life 360 app. You can monitor their speed, whether they're braking hard, all sorts of different things on this app. If they're speeding, you can actually get on and see what their real-time speed is.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, it's called Life 360. A lot of the new cars have technology in them where you can limit how loud they can play the radio. All sorts of different things. And some of the software that's built into the newer cars will actually give you some of this stuff that you can get from this Life 360 app. So I would encourage you to look into those, so that you know, not so much Big Brotherish, but from a safety standpoint. You know, if you're not in the car with them, you need to know what their driving behavior is.
Absolutely.
And just have them, you know, if they get into a crash with somebody, call the police. Have us come out and take care of it. Don't let an adult driver from in another car try to talk your son or daughter into not reporting it to the police. It needs to be reported, because it's very hard to follow up on that later on. You know, just practice skills and knowledge. Just fill them with those things, and you know, it's a big deal. It's a huge step toward independence. But like I mentioned earlier, it's a privilege, and parents, you may like this. When you go to get their license at the Secretary of State, you hold their trump card on whether they get their license and whether you can have their license removed. And usually the people at the Secretary of State will let you know that, but I'm letting you know that ahead of time. When you go in with them, you hold the key.
Wow. Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Right, Doug.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming on the show
Thank you.
telling us about teen driving, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay. Thanks so much for having me.
If you have an idea for a parenting show topic or guest, talk to us on Twitter and Facebook at #CTN Ann Arbor.
For more on our programming and services, visit a2gov.org/CTN and visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to watch our full lineup, and remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for joining us on this adventure in parenthood.